The grand chandelier in the vast marble-floored hallway sparkled under the evening light as Nicholas Carter stepped into his mansion, the weight of another successful day settling on his shoulders. He was a man who had everything: wealth, power, influence. Yet tonight, an unsettling emptiness gnawed at him. He loosened his tie, his sharp grey eyes scanning the luxurious surroundings, but his mind drifted elsewhere, somewhere far from the towering glass windows and expensive artwork that lined his home. A faint rustling noise broke his thoughts. He turned toward the kitchen, where the new maid was quietly arranging dishes. Nicholas had barely noticed when his house manager, Mrs. Lawson, mentioned hiring someone new. He had no reason to care. Staff came and went, and as long as his house ran smoothly, he never paid them much attention. But something about the woman's presence felt off. She moved with quiet precision, her slender hands carefully stacking the plates. Her back was turned to him, but something in the way she carried herself stirred a distant memory. Nicholas took a step closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. There was an air of familiarity in the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the way she stood, tall but with a certain softness. And then she turned. For a moment, the world around him faded, the clatter of silverware, the distant hum of traffic outside, even the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. Everything seemed to pause. His breath hitched as he stared into her deep brown eyes he had once known better than his own. Reflection. It couldn't be. Amelia. His voice was barely a whisper, yet the name carried the weight of years lost, of forgotten promises, and aching regret. The woman's expression froze, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter as if the ground beneath her had suddenly become unstable. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. A long silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken emotions and questions neither of them were ready to face. Nicholas felt his heart slam against his chest. Amelia Thompson, the girl who had once been his entire world, the girl he had planned to spend his life with, the girl who had disappeared without a trace. His mind raced, struggling to process what he was seeing. The Amelia he remembered had been full of light, her laughter like music, her dreams as big as the sky. They had grown up together in a small town, two inseparable souls who had sworn to never let the world pull them apart. And yet, here they were, strangers in the same room, separated by years of silence and secrets. Amelia swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the dish towel she held. "Sir, do you need anything?" Her voice was calm, composed, too composed. Nicholas blinked, his stomach twisting. "Sir?" The word stung more than he expected. Did she not recognize him? Or was she pretending? He took a slow step closer, his mind desperate for answers. "Amelia." "It's me, Nick." Her lips trembled for just a second before she straightened her posture, her face unreadable. "I know." His breath caught. She knew. Then why? Before he could speak, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted them. Mrs. Lawson entered, oblivious to the charged atmosphere. "Ah, Mr. Carter, I see you've met Amelia. She just started today." She turned to Amelia with a warm smile. "I hope everything's been to your liking." Amelia nodded stiffly. "Yes, ma'am." Nicholas clenched his jaw, forcing himself to mask his emotions. This wasn't the time, but his mind was already a storm of questions. Why was she here? Why had she never reached out? What had happened to her all these years? As Amelia turned back to her work, Nicholas knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let her disappear again. Nicholas couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with memories he thought he had buried. Long ago, Amelia Thompson, after all these years, she was here, in his home, working as a maid, acting like they were nothing more than strangers. He turned onto his side, frustrated. How had this happened? The last time he saw her, they were barely 18, clinging to each other under the old oak tree by the lake, whispering dreams about the future. He had promised to take care of her, to build a life together. Then one day, she was gone. No explanation, no goodbye, just vanished. He had searched for her, asked around town, even checked with her distant relatives. But no one knew where she had gone. It was as if she had been erased from his life overnight. And now, she was here, acting like none of it ever happened. The next morning, Nicholas walked into the dining room, determined to get answers. Amelia was already there, quietly setting the table, her movements precise, her face unreadable. He studied her, looking for traces of the girl he once knew, but all he saw was someone guarded, careful. "You disappeared," he said, his voice low but firm. Amelia stiffened, but didn't turn around. "I had to." "That's not an answer," he pressed. "I looked for you, Amelia. She turned then, her eyes meeting his, filled with something he couldn't quite name. Pain? Regret? Fear? "It doesn't matter anymore, Nicholas," she said softly. "That was a long time ago." His chest tightened. "It matters to me." She took a shaky breath, gripping the edge of the table. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something important. But then, just as quickly, she shut down again. "I need this job," she said finally. "Please don't make this difficult." Nicholas stared at her, trying to make sense of the situation. The Amelia he knew had never been this distant. She had never been the kind of person to run away without reason. What had happened to her? And why was she acting like she didn't want him to know? The days passed, and Nicholas couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Amelia's story than she was letting on. He started paying more attention, watching her in quiet moments when she thought no one was looking. He saw the way her hands trembled, sometimes when she thought too hard, the way she avoided certain conversations, the way she flinched ever so slightly at unexpected sounds. She was hiding something. Then, one evening, Nicholas overheard a conversation that made everything even more confusing. He had been in his study, reviewing some business reports, when he heard Amelia talking in the hallway. Her voice was hushed, urgent, curious. He got up and stepped closer to the door. "I told you I don't have it yet," she was saying. "I just need more time. No, I can't ask him for anything. Please, I'll figure something out." A pause, then a heavy sigh. "I know what I promised." Nicholas frowned, his mind racing. Who was she talking to? What promise? And what did she mean by, "I can't ask him for anything"? He took a step forward, but just as he did, Amelia hung up the call and turned around. Their eyes met, and for the briefest second, she looked terrified. Then, just as quickly, she masked it. "Eavesdropping, Mr. Carter?" she asked, her voice light but forced. Nicholas folded his arms. "Who are you talking to?" She shook her head. "It's nothing important." "Doesn't sound like nothing." Amelia sighed and looked away. "It's personal." Nicholas studied her. "If you're in trouble, I can help." She let out a dry laugh. "You can't fix everything with money, Nicholas." He didn't miss the way she said his name. Soft, familiar, yet distant. "Try me." She hesitated, and for a second, he thought she might tell him. But then she shook her head. "You should go to bed," she said instead. "It's late." And just like that, The wall between them was back up, but Nicholas wasn't going to let this go. He knew, deep in his gut, that something wasn't right, and he wasn't about to stand by and watch Amelia suffer in silence. He was going to find out the truth, no matter what it took. Nicholas couldn't let it go. The way Amelia shut him out, the way she looked over her shoulder, as if expecting something, or someone, to appear. It wasn't normal. She was in trouble. He could feel it. The next evening, he made a decision. If she wasn't going to tell him the truth, he would find it himself. He asked his assistant to run a background check. Something simple, just to see where she had been all these years. What came back shook him to his core. Amelia had been married. Not just married, trapped. The man, a local businessman named Gerald Marks, had a history of financial troubles, failed investments, and shady dealings. But the worst part, reports of domestic incidents, police records that never went anywhere because Amelia had never pressed charges. Nicholas clenched his fists as he read. She had been suffering, and he had never known. That night, when Amelia finished her work, Nicholas stopped her at the front door. She looked up at him, startled. "Who is he?" he asked, quietly. Her face paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." Nicholas stepped closer. "Gerald Marks." Amelia's breath caught. "I know everything, Amelia," he said. "Why didn't you tell me?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "Because it's not your problem. Not my problem." His voice hardened. "You think I'm just going to stand here and let you go through this alone?" She shook her head, her body trembling. "I left him, Nicholas. I got away. But he's not done with me. He wants money, says I owe him for all the years we were together. And if I don't pay..." Her voice broke. Nicholas felt a cold rage settle in his chest. "He threatened you." She didn't answer, but she didn't have to. He could see it in her eyes. Nicholas took a deep breath, steadying himself. "You're not alone in this, Amelia. You never were." Amelia looked at him, something shifting in her expression, a mix of relief and something deeper, something she had been holding back for years. But before either of them could say another word, the sound of a car pulling up outside made them both freeze. Amelia's face drained of color. Nicholas turned toward the door, just as the knock came. Loud, demanding. He didn't need to ask who it was. He already knew. Without thinking, he stepped in front of Amelia, shielding her. Then, with controlled fury, he opened the door. Gerald Marks stood on the porch, his suit slightly wrinkled, his smirk full of arrogance. Well, he drawled, looking past Nicholas at Amelia. "You've been hiding in a pretty little place, haven't you?" Nicholas didn't move. "You have 5 seconds to leave." Gerald laughed. "Relax, Carter. This is just a friendly visit. Amelia and I have unfinished business. She doesn't owe you anything." Gerald's smirk twitched. "Oh, but she does. She walked out on a marriage, left me in debt. That money has to come from somewhere." He tilted his head. "Unless, of course, you're offering to pay for her." Nicholas clenched his jaw. "I'm offering you a choice. Walk away now, or I make sure you regret coming here." For the first time, Gerald hesitated. Nicholas wasn't just a millionaire. He was powerful, connected, not someone to cross. Gerald exhaled sharply, then turned to Amelia. "This isn't over," he muttered, before stepping back. Nicholas didn't take his eyes off him until he got into his car and drove away. The moment the taillights disappeared down the road, Amelia let out a shaky breath, her hands gripping the door frame. Nicholas turned to her. "You don't have to run anymore," he said softly. Amelia looked up at him, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I don't know how to stop running. Nicholas took her hands in his grip steady, strong. Then let me help you. For the first time in years, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore.